Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to be turning in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7 is where we will be with our study this evening. Matthew chapter 7. If there is one verse in the Bible everybody knows besides Jesus wept, it is Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, "Judge not that you be not judged." Is out for most everything and everybody. Beginning in verse 1, "Judge not that you be not judged, for with what judgment you judge, you'll be judged, and with the same measure you use, it'll be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me remove the speck out of your eye,' and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, then you'll see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces." Sometimes we talk about the games little children play. I would suggest to you there are some games that grown people play too. And one game that grown people play is called the label game. And it goes something like this. If you can find someone that's just a little bit different, maybe they talk a little bit different, maybe they're from a different culture, and if you can take what they are and how they're different, and then share that with others because you're only concerned about them, then we can label them. And again, it goes something like this. You first of all look at the externals. Then you form a critical judgment. And then you find a label to put on them because it's just easier to label somebody. And then we begin to exert the P word, power. Because we are the ones that aren't different, and they are, and we've labeled them something, then we have the power and the control. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 6, Jesus has, with the skill of a fine-tuned surgeon, cut through every sinew, every muscle, and around every nerve to get to the root of the problem and excise the tumor. And what he says in short is this: stop it. Stop it right now. Now, qualify something. He's talking about a plank in your eye versus a splinter in your eye. It's not okay for us to have a splinter in our eye. The first house that we bought when we moved to the Dallas area in 91 had this popcorn ceiling. Remember that back in the 70s, 80s? They'd spray this stuff on and it just look like popcorn on the ceiling. Well, if you go to scrape that off, which we did, those little popcorns are called stipples. And you want to wear glasses, safety glasses, because if you didn't, one of those little stipples would get in your eye and it would irritate your eye. It's not okay to have a stipple in your eye. It's not okay to have a splinter in our eye. And so when he's talking about having a plank and a splinter, he's not saying, okay, it's fine with you if you have the splinter, just as long as you don't have the plank. A splinter can also produce blindness, just like a plank can produce blindness. Now, the fault in playing the label game is, number one, we never have all the information. And number two, there's nobody that is 100% objective. We all have our prejudices, whether we acknowledge them or not. And so because we don't have all the information, missing information, and because we're not objective, we form our own prejudicial conclusions about things, then the conclusion that we reach to label somebody may not be a 30-second cousin to what the truth really is. Now, when the Lord says in verse 1, judge not that you be not judged, let's first of all disabuse ourselves of one thing. He's not telling us that it's wrong to judge. In fact, in the very text we just read, there's a judgment to be made. Don't cast your pearls before swine. You have to determine if someone's a dog or a pig before you know what to do with your jewelry. And that requires a judgment on our part. Second, in 1 Corinthians 5, when Paul is talking to the church at Corinth about the man they have in their fellowship because they've not mourned, the Lord tells them that are within, you judge. Without, I will judge. So when he says, judge not that you be not judged, he's not saying there's not a place for judgment or that we should not make judgments. We just need to keep it in the context of what he's talking about here. And what he's talking about is don't be hypercritical and hypocritical. Hypercritical may sound like something like this. We don't want to be harsh and over-censorious, censoring people. We're harsh and critical and censoring in our conversations. That might go something like this. I know why you walked by me and didn't say anything. I saw you. I know what you're thinking. I know why I wasn't invited over with the preacher. I know why you didn't invite me. I know why my name was in the bulletin. I know why you left it off. And so we form those quick and petty faults to complain and find weaknesses, and we feel justified in our conclusions, prejudicial though they may be, because now we have gained the power. Just an illustration. As I said Sunday, between the years of 1981 and 88, I lived in Del Rio, Texas. My dad preached in Denton, Texas for 11 and a half years. And the church in Denton, Jody and I still call home. We love those people, small though the congregation may be, we love those people. Well, about 83, they were going to have me for a gospel meeting. So this is the young boy come home. Except there was one individual in the congregation when they had a men's meeting that objected to me coming. And the reason he objected was because when we were home one time for the holidays, now time out, from Del Rio to Denton is 9 hours. You don't get there overnight. You got to be going there. And so we were home for the holidays back on Point, and we were there on Wednesday night. And we were talking to just a number of people, just visiting a number of people that we're glad to see again. But this man said, I don't want to have him because when he visited one time, he didn't talk to me. So one of the leading men called me and said, will you call him and please talk to him? And I called the man. And I apologized all over myself and said, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to miss you. I'm so sorry. And he said, well, you should be. I went to hold the meeting, so I guess that they worked it past. But do you see that? I know why you didn't talk to me. We're visiting home, and we're seeing a lot of people. We're not intending to miss anybody. But do you see where that puts us when we do that? That puts us in the place of God to judge another man's servant. And we don't have that prerogative. Furthermore, it kills our enthusiasm for people, and it kills the enthusiasm of people. When that kind of harshness, that kind of fault finding, that kind of complaining, that kind of control and power takes place. It's like someone said, it's forming a judgment like looking through a keyhole. That keyhole, that small little diameter that you close one eye and you look through with the other eye, but you only see the diameter, you only see to the scope of what the diameter of the keyhole is. And because we look through the keyhole and see something, we form perspectives and we make judgments. But perspectives are interesting things. How many times has it been said, well, perspective is reality? No. Reality is reality. Perspective is perspective. If the perspective is that we are kind, that we are loving, then people are going to conclude that's who we are. If people conclude that, well, we're ugly and we're critical, that's who people are going to conclude who we are. And it doesn't matter how many times we try to correct that from the negative point of view, it's always going to be from that point because my perspective wouldn't lie to me. Except as I remind again, we don't have all the information and we all form prejudicial conclusions as a result of looking through a keyhole. I would suggest that this text of the Lord is so relevant today. Number one, it's relevant in society. But I suggest to you it's relevant for God's people. It's relevant in every local congregation. Because we're people. We're people trying to work together who have perspectives about each other, who form judgments about each other. And in a local church, when we've been with each other a while and we rub elbows quite often, we pretty much know, we think we know, the strengths and the weaknesses of everybody, and we don't mind elevating the weaknesses and minimizing the strengths. So the first thing that makes this important is, the Lord said, the judgment you use will be the judgment that is used upon you. And so if we look at people with some kind of lynx-eyed, jaded cynicism, then that kind of lynx-eyed, jaded cynicism is how we are going to be judged. That's the judgment that's going to be meted out for us. Well, if I don't want to be judged by that kind of jaded, cynical mindset, then what he's saying is, you don't judge that kind of cynical, jaded mindset. And so the judgment we use is the judgment that will be used against us. Now that's enough to close the lesson right there. That's enough to make us stop and think real hard, myself included, real hard about the judgments I make about people. The second thing is, the first was hypercritical, it's hypocritical. It's hypocritical to begin to use our tongues to have that kind of censoring, kind of critical, condescending labeling of people, because what it suggests is, I'm better than you and I don't do that. I'm above you. The Lord, to illustrate that, uses an illustration that was intended to be humorous. I would suggest the Lord uses humor when He teaches. Pause. Have you heard strain at a gnat and swallow a camel? That was intended to be humorous. Let me put it in 2024 language. Does anybody here like homemade ice cream? I'm talking about homemade ice cream with 6 cans of Eagle brand milk. I'm talking about a half a dozen eggs. I'm talking about loaded down with sugar. I'm talking about the kind that really is homemade. I'm not talking about this 2% stuff. I'm talking about really homemade ice cream. And so you have a homemade ice cream party. And you fill your bowl with rich homemade ice cream. And someone asks you, would you like to have a drink? And the response is, yes, I'll take a Diet Coke. Strain at a gnat, swallow a camel. Well, the Lord used an illustration here. In verse 3, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? This is an absurdity. It's taking it to the extreme. And so here's the imagery. Here's this individual laboring with a railroad tie coming out his eye. Just get that image. This railroad tie is protruding out of this guy's eye. And this other guy's got a splinter. And the man that has the railroad tie protruding out of his eye, he's bearing up under the weight, almost standing there. He's trying to get close to the guy who's got a splinter with that railroad tie in his eye. And every time he does, he knocks himself and then the other guy out. You see how ludicrous that would be? Imagine trying to walk around with a railroad tie sticking out of your eye. And then you're trying to get something small out of somebody else's eye when you can't get out of your own way. The Lord uses that. And what he says to them is, you first are going to have to get the plank out of your own eye before we ever begin trying to get the speck out of the other person's eye. So that suggests something. That suggests if we're going to go splinter hunting with people, if we're going to try to find the splinters in people's eye and get the splinters out of their eyes, then we need to do what the old proverb is. We need to make sure our doorstep's clean first. We need to make sure that we're not guilty of the same things we're trying to do, that we don't have the same splinter he's got. Except my splinter's a log and his splinter's a splinter. And so to do that, first of all, we're going to have to make sure our own doorstep is clean before we do that. And so he says, you get this beam out of your eye. Let's talk about some beams for just a moment. You remember the story of Hannah? How that Hannah was barren? And she prays to the Lord for a child. And Eli sees her praying. And for some unknown reason, the conclusion Eli comes to is, she's drunk. Might there be another conclusion? You see, he didn't have all the information. And there was something prejudicial about that conclusion. There was some prejudice he had about Hannah that formed that conclusion. Do you see the beam he had in his eye? He couldn't see the speck in her eye because he's too busy judging her to be drunk when actually what she's doing is praying to God. Remember the story of David when Nathan comes to him? After David has taken Uriah's wife, Nathan comes and tells him this story about this man that has hundreds of ewe lambs. And you got this one man that has a one ewe lamb. And the guy that has 100 ewe lambs takes the man's one ewe lamb and offers that as a meal to someone in his house. And David is livid about that. And David's conclusion is, he ought to die. And Nathan said, David, you're the man. See the beam he had in his eye? He was blind to his own weaknesses and own faults and was ready to put someone else to death. So let me ask you, have you ever had to pull a beam out of your eye? There are 4 siblings in my family. I have an older sister by 3 years. I'm the second. I have a younger brother and sister that are twins, younger by 5 years. My 2 sisters are faithfully serving the Lord. The heartbreak of my parents is my younger brother hasn't served the Lord for years. It was his fault his marriage failed. And one day, on Thanksgiving holiday, he was passing through. And he stopped at Mom and Dad's house because supposedly he wanted to get a tool from Dad. And came in the house to tell everybody hi. I was sitting in the corner at a table where we had been playing 42. Do y'all play 42 in Arkansas? You can't be a Texan if you don't play 42. We play 42. When everybody got up, I sat in the corner. And my brother walked over and stuck his hand out like that. Sitting down, I looked up at him and I said, I can't shake your hand. He turned and walked out, and immediately there was this dark cloud over the house. My dad went to his office. Didn't say a word. I said, Dad, I couldn't shake his hand. He's manipulating the whole situation. He's taking advantage of you. Well, from Bryan College Station to Dallas, Texas, it's a 3-hour drive. And somewhere in the middle of that 3-hour drive, I realized something. I realized I was just the older brother. and I had a big beam in my eye. I wrote everyone in that family a letter begging forgiveness. I wrote my brother, I called my brother and asked him for forgiveness. And whenever I saw him, I would say, please forgive me. When I'm in the Austin, Texas area, he lives in the Austin area. And when I'm in the Austin area, Texas, preaching, he knows I'm there. He always comes to hear me. And one time he heard this sermon. And finally, after apologizing innumerable times, he said, Rick, we're fine. But I'm going to ask you something. As awful as adultery is being the older brother any better? Is having the beam in our eye that destroys someone any better? Now, we'll jump and shout hard and loud about immorality, but we'll give a nice sugar pass to partiality and prejudicial behavior to people. And the Lord said, we got to get the beam out of our eye. Let's just talk about some solutions as we proceed here and work toward the end of the sermon. The Lord gives us the first answer. He said, first, get the beam out of your eye before, verse 5, hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. First, it takes self-examination. We're going to have to first examine ourselves. To obey this command, we're going to have to first be honest, sincerely honest with ourselves about our beams in our eyes. We're going to have to be the kind of people who understand what forgiveness is because we have been forgiven. Just like what I mentioned last night, Simon the Pharisee and the woman that came to wash Jesus' feet, who needed forgiveness the most? He who sinned the most. Well, we have to realize we have been forgiven of a whole lot of forgiveness. We've been given a lot of grace. And if we've been given a lot of grace, then that then means we also need to be willing to extend that grace and forgiveness. In 1 Corinthians 13, when he's talking about the attributes of love, he said, love believes all things. I don't think he's talking about their love is gullible. I think what he's saying there is, love gives the benefit of the doubt. Now, here's my question for us. Do I want someone to give me the benefit of the doubt? Let me go back to Denton. Would it have been nice for that older brother, I'm younger, would it have been nice for that older brother to have given me the benefit of the doubt? Say, well, he was just in, I see everybody was around him, he was swamped, he didn't mean to overlook me, he didn't mean that. Do we want someone to give us the benefit of the doubt? Well, if I want someone to give me the benefit of the doubt, then I need to give others the benefit of the doubt. That's the first thing. We must first examine ourselves. I remember the story of a man that played minor league baseball. He'd been having a bad day. In center field, he'd been having a bad day. I mean, every ball that came there, he misjudged it. It either got by him on the ground, flew over him in the head, or dropped it, whatever it was. And finally, the player manager said, you sit on the bench, I'm going to play center field for a while. First ball's hit. High fly ball. The player manager puts his glove up, misjudges it, hits him right smack dab in the forehead. Next comes a hot grounder. Gets down to field, it takes a bad hop and hops right up and hits him right smack dab in the mouth. Next ball that comes is a line drive. He puts his glove up to catch it, misses it, smacks him right in the nose. The player manager goes to the dugout and says to the man been playing center field, you see that? You've run center field so nobody can catch a ball. Nobody can play it. You see what I'm talking about? We need to be given the benefit of the doubt. When I go to a church like I've come here, people ask me about Campbell Road. They ask me, how long have you been there? And I tell them, I've been there 32 years. They say, oh, wow. And I said, they've been real long suffering. And what I've had to learn is they've had to live with me. If I want them to give me the benefit of the doubt, I've got to give them the benefit of the doubt. The second thing is, We need to remember to be kind and tender, and here's my point. If you're going to have cataract surgery, do you want someone that graduated from Ice Pick University? Or do you want someone that is a finely skilled ophthalmologist who knows where and how to cut or use a laser? My point is, we have enough blind-eyed critics running around. We need to also have the precision of someone that is a finely skilled surgeon. When you have cataracts removed, your ophthalmologist doesn't come in and start poking around in your eye. He deals with it kindly and tenderly. The third thing I would suggest is we may need to remember we're dealing with family. We're dealing with a brother or a sister. We're not dealing with an enemy outside. We're dealing with someone who is a child of God, a recipient of grace, just like I have been a recipient of grace. And I need to remember, but before I take tongue in mouth to begin to express myself, or in my mind to form harsh, critical, hypocritical, hypercritical judgments of people, I need to remember something. That's my brother or my sister. That's someone who is a fellow heir to the grace of life. And what I'm fixing to do is I'm fixing to destroy, or at least significantly harm, and do great damage to a brother or a sister, to one of my brothers or sister that's a fellow heir of the grace of life. I need to remember I'm talking about someone in my family. You know, local churches, we're interesting mixtures of people, aren't we? And just like families, in local churches, what will we do? We'll pick a little bit. We'll fuss a little bit. We'll gripe a little bit. We'll complain a little bit about somebody until the time to rally around because of the need. And I have never seen people rally around because of the need like God's people do. We may be like brothers and sisters in a physical family. We may have a little bit of this going on along the way. But don't let anybody talk about my sisters or my brother. Right? So when a need happens in a church family, it may be we've been doing a little bit of this along the way. But when the need arises, all that goes out the wayside. And what we know is we got a family member hurting, and we're going to rally, and we're going to hold them. We're going to help carry them out. The fourth thing is, I would suggest, is if we can't put ourselves in their shoes, we may need to remember we haven't been where they've been. We haven't experienced what they've experienced. I did not grow up in a significantly dysfunctional home. I say significantly because every home has dysfunction. I did not grow up in a home where my father abused my mother. I did not grow up in a home where my father put the family in debt. I did not grow up in a home where my mother or my father were alcoholics. I did not grow up in a home where my mother and father would fight. And the reason is, and this is the literal truth, 75 years of marriage, my mother won't fight with my dad. My dad can get cross and cranky, but my mother won't fight with him. It's because she grew up in a home where there's alcoholism and fussing and fighting all the time, and she wasn't going to be that way. I didn't grow up in a home like that. I didn't grow up in a home where drugs were an issue. I didn't grow up in a home like that. I didn't grow up in a home where there was ever even a thought of divorce or a thought of immorality. Those things are not what I grew up with. But now someone comes and talks to me, and they're struggling with one of those things. I may not have experienced what they have experienced, and I can tell them, I don't understand your experience, but I want you to know, my heart goes out to you, and I'm going to do my best to try to help you. Maybe if we just remember we haven't walked in their shoes, or if we happen to have experienced what they have experienced, that will change our attitude toward them. I first heard this story, another dated illustration, by Paul Harvey. I know our younger people don't know who Paul Harvey is. He was a very prominent radio commentator in former years. He told this story on the rest of the story one day. It's about a young man by the name of Teddy Stollard. Now let me pause and add this. I since have been challenged to do the research on this story to see if it actually was true or not. Because Paul Harvey said it, I thought it can't be wrong because Paul Harvey said it. But I did find out, I'm adding this codicil to it, that the story's not true, but it still illustrates the point well, so I'm going to use it. The story of a young boy that was in the 5th grade, and Miss Thompson, his 5th grade teacher, just didn't care for Teddy at all. He'd come in and he was dirty. It's obvious he hadn't taken a bath in several days. His hands were dirty. His clothes weren't dirty. His clothes weren't clean. But she had his records from the first 4 years. The 1st grade record said, great potential, slow learner, needs help at home. 2nd year, same thing, needs help at home, mother sick. 3rd grade year, great potential, works slow, good attitude, good behavior, mother died. 4th grade year, good behavior, good attitude, slow learner, no help from father at home. Now, when Miss Thompson would give the kids a test or paper, because she didn't really care for Teddy, she delighted in making that big red F on his paper. But it came time for the holiday presents for the teachers, and so all the students brought a present for Mrs. Thompson, and it was wrapped up in a nice, beautiful package with nice, beautiful bow. I mean, it was just really becoming of a package. And they come and they give them to her, and she said, oh, it's so pretty. Thank you so much. Teddy brought his present in a grocery bag, a large grocery bag that obviously had been used several times, had it folded over. And Miss Thompson opened all the presents that were there, and she just thanked the kids so much because they were so precious. And finally, she got to Teddy's. And she pulled 2 things out. One was a bracelet with rhinestones on it, with some of the rhinestones missing. And another was a bottle of perfume, about half used, that when you smelled it, you really didn't want to smell it. It was not that aromatic. But she put the bracelet on and sprayed the perfume. When he left the room for the holidays, he said, Miss Thompson, when you wear that bracelet and put on that perfume, you remind me of my mother. Well, the second half of the year came back, and she had a totally different attitude toward Teddy. He began to excel in her class and did great. Years passed by, and she received a letter from him. Dear Miss Thompson, I'm about to graduate from high school, second in my class. I just want you to know. Another 4 years go by. She receives another letter. Dear Miss Thompson, I'm about to graduate from college, first in my class. I just want you to know. Another 4 years go by. This time she gets a letter. Teddy Stollard, MD. Dear Miss Thompson, I'm graduating from medical school in the top of my class on this date, and the next day I'm getting married. Would you please come to my graduation and sit in my mother's chair when I get married? You see that? See how just a little thing changes things? We understand we may not have been where they're at. And they may not need a beam. They may need somebody with great precision and tenderness to get the splinter out. Fifth and finally, I would suggest that we need to remember we're not putting people on probation and we're not trying to annihilate them. We're trying to restore them. We're trying to restore them. And the attitude toward restoration and reconciliation is totally different than annihilation and probation. And that first boy of Luke chapter 15, That daddy's been watching while he's a long way off. He waited. That boy got to the front step and said, "You just stand there a while. We're going to talk. Before you come back in this house, you're going to live in the barn with the slaves, and you eat what the slaves eat. And if in 6 months you're still good, I'll think about letting you come in the house." That's not what that father did. That father, he didn't wait till the boy got there. He ran and met the boy and hugged him and kissed him and gave him the ring and the robe and killed a fatted calf for him. Why? Because his son that was lost had come home. We can help someone who's got a splinter because we've got the beam out of our eye. We're helping someone come home. And so the Lord says, first examine yourself. Remember to be tender. Remember, you're talking about someone in a family. Remember that we haven't been where they've been, and remember, we're trying to restore someone. I believe the truth of Matthew chapter 19 and verse 9. I think we ought to preach loudly and boldly about what God says about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. I believe strongly about the work of the Lord's church. And we need to teach upon the limitations of the Lord's church boldly and strongly. We need to teach about what we call those doctrinal things. But Matthew chapter 7 and verses 1 through 5 is just as doctrinal as Matthew chapter 19 and verse 9. And if we preach loud and strong, we get Matthew chapter 19 verse 9 wrong, right, but we fail Matthew chapter 7 verses 1 through 5, we're just as wrong as someone who misses Matthew 19 and verse 9. We need to be careful. I need to be careful about grace-killing motives that kills the spirit of people. And then when they walk out the door because I've killed their spirit, I say, well, they were a liberal anyway. That's my justification. Listen, if we're going to restore a brother from his sins, we've got to judge something here. We've got to make a conclusion. If we're going to teach someone that's lost to be saved, we've got to teach them. We've got to make a conclusion about something. But a brother who's in sin or someone who's lost, they need a helping hand, not a dagger. They need someone that's bending down to them like the Lord reached down to us and said, I will pull you up to me. We need to help someone come home to Him. The story is told in a book entitled 17 Things I Wish My Children Knew About God. The author of the book, his name is J. Mack Stiles. Had a boy by the name of David. When David was born, there was some damage to his skull because of some complications in birth. And he was not retarded, but retarded his growth in his thinking and academics. He's in second grade, and it was time to play on the playground, and he was sitting on the little edge of the curb there by the playground, and one of the boys came over and began to talk to him and said, you want to be friends? And little David said, yes, I want to be friends. And then a minute, the friend got up and ran off and said, he failed. He'd been held back. He failed. When J. Mack picked little David up after school, he said, well, son, how'd it go? And he told his daddy that. And of course, his daddy just was crestfallen. And little David said, Daddy, he didn't want to be my friend, did he? And J. Mack said, no, son, he didn't. But David was going to have a birthday. And J. Mack said, I told my son I'd pay for everybody to have the thing that you shoot, these laser party with all your friends. And David invited a girl by the name of Kristen, and Kristen's mother thanked J. Mack. Thank you for inviting her. Nobody ever invites her. Another little boy came up and just hugged J. Mack's leg and said, thank you for inviting me. He was Down syndrome. Nobody ever included him. And guess who was included to come play laser tag? The little boy who ran off and said, you failed. You see, all those kids were invited to a birthday party. And we have been invited to a feast. We've been invited to a feast. And we're going to find people there at that feast who are just like us, with strengths and weaknesses. Everyone who needs the kind of mercy and grace that David gave his friend who said he failed. The Lord said, judge not that you be not judged, for the judgment which you judge, you shall be judged. I want to be more merciful, so I can plead, Lord, please be merciful to me. And that mercy is extended to you tonight if you need his hand. If you need salvation tonight, be baptized for the remission of your sins because you believe him to be the Son of God. If you need to go home and spend time in your closet in prayer to God, his merciful hand is extended toward us. The grace of God hath appeared. And that grace of God hath appeared in his Son, teaching us how we can live to be as he is, to be more like Jesus. We can help you come while together we stand and sing.